I'm honored to introduce today Andre Koen, who is an energetic presenter, a powerful communicator, and a teacher. His educational influence spans the North American continent. Andre integrates his abilities as an improvisational and conversational comedian, large group facilitator, keynote speaker, and classroom teacher to captivate and educate the audience. There are many words and signs to Andre Koen: educator, student, comedian, speaker, activist, facilitator, coach, mentee, mentor, leader, team member, community organizer, so many keep it short. Diversity trainer, motivator, friend, and son. The most representative, however, is Andre the Invincible Spirit. Please welcome Mr. Andre Koen, President and founder of AF Horizons.
So how is my voice projecting with this microphone? Pretty well? Wonderful, wonderful. I do have to tell you that I feel like I'm in a cage with this this barrier between myself and you. By training, I'm a classroom teacher, and so being close to my audience is important. So just to kind of warm up the temperature in the room and maybe close this gap between us, what I like to do is teach to the test. I want to teach to the test. As a matter of fact, I see some people in the audience that, like, my heart is jumping because I'm so excited to see folks. Like, I didn't know that some of my friends are guardians at light and we're connected with the court in this way. So really excited about that. Sorry, I just had a pause. I'll make my introduction to my friends later, but very excited. So I was a high school teacher in a charter school called Skills for Tomorrow. Skills for Tomorrow. And there was a point in my life where I was not a good teacher because I taught to the test. I taught to the test. So every week, every Monday through Thursday, I would teach all of my curriculum, and every Friday I would give my students a pop quiz. Every Friday, a pop quiz. And many of my students were surprised every Friday by this pop quiz. So I want to give you a pop quiz as well, but to do that, I have to give you the curriculum. I have to teach you what I want to give you the pop quiz on. All right? So here is the answer. So I'm going to give you the answer to the pop quiz. And the answer goes like this: fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. Huh. That's the answer. All right? So please, if you can set your coffee aside, your Danish, just for a second, and practice with me the answer to the pop quiz. All right? So those of you who are able to, please stand or participate in whatever way you can, please do so. All right? So the answer goes, and those kids who are too cool for school, if you're not participating, that actually makes you stand out more than if you were participating. Right? So here we go. So the answer is fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. Good. All right, great. Wonderful practice. Please continue to stand if you're able. So here is the question. Guardian ad litem, how do you feel? Fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. That was very nice. That was very nice. It is clear that there are Lutherans in the room. I happen to be an evangelical, and we're just like Lutherans, except we rip the cap off the sucker, all right? So this time I want, with all the enthusiasm you have this morning, I want you to answer that question. How do you feel? Fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. Good job. You may be seated. Thank you. Give yourselves a hand. All right, how many people felt goofy or odd doing that particular that cheer this morning? Be honest. Giannis. All right, good. So a lot of hands. What I'd like to submit to you is that oftentimes the families that we're working with feel like that when working with us. We ask them to think differently than they've typically thought. They're interacting with us from a place of distress oftentimes, and it is really difficult to give your dirty laundry to someone you don't know. As much as there are these legends of people really wanting to live off the system, that people want to suck up all of our resources, we have to teach people how to be socialists. With all that talk and that rhetoric, I would submit to you that it is the human soul's desire to be self-sufficient in a group. To be self-sufficient in a group. Anyone who claims that their success is by their own making is delusional. Because if people did not buy the product that you needed people to buy your thing so you could be great. You need people to fill the Colosseum so that they can see your greatness displayed. We are connected in some very powerful ways. But oftentimes it is our privilege that doesn't allow us to see that. So I will submit to you that I walk into this room with a certain amount of privilege. I'm 6'2". I'm a cisgendered male, which means that my gender identity and my biology match. I'm cisgendered. My pronouns are he, his, and him. My predominant language is English. The language that I was birthed into was English. My nationality is that I'm American. My religious affiliation is I'm a conservative Christian. I have letters behind my last name that were given to me because of my matriculation through higher education, and they gave their stamp of approval by giving me their degree. I would suggest that I'm probably lower middle class or upper lower class in terms of my status. I have privileges. I have privileges. And so do you. But the problem isn't having the privilege. The privilege is not a problem because we're all given certain advantages and certain disadvantages. But it's what I do with that privilege that matters. And if I choose to use my privilege as a weapon to beat other people for not having a privilege, most of the things that I mentioned, I didn't have any control over. Most of the things that I mentioned, I didn't have any control over. So for me to use that as a weapon is not helpful to the human state of being. So I want you to think about the privileges that you have, the privileges that you've been granted, and not look at them and be shameful or embarrassed by them, but to recognize that those are tools that you can use to actually help somebody else. Unlike American Idol, anyone ever seen those shows, right? Those reality shows where people are showing how they do something better than someone else and that they get the glory. Oh. Our gifts and talents are not actually for us. They're not actually for us. Those privileges that are granted to us, are actually supposed to be used for somebody else. Used for somebody else. The example that I like to use is that of an orange tree, right? Anyone seen orange trees? So I was young and I went to Phoenix, Arizona for a conference. And it was, I was young. I think it was like maybe 18 or something. It was one of my, not only one of my first flights as a kid, and there's some rationale behind why 18 would have been some of my first flights, but it was one of my first flights. We went down to Phoenix in the winter time, so it was February. So there it was probably, people had on coats, which was funny, because it was like 80 degrees. It's cold. And they had these. Anyone been down to Phoenix? Down that part? Okay, cool. So you'll know what I'm talking about. But there is nothing in Phoenix that was not transplanted from someplace else, including people, right? People, plants, all this stuff. So I'm walking down the street, and being a kid from the city, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, which is Southwest Ohio, AKA also known as Northern Kentucky, right? So I lived grew up in Ohio, city boy as much as you can in Ohio and that part of the country. And so going to this Phoenix thing was just really interesting to me. It was just really interesting because they did bizarre things. Like they had all these orange trees on the streets. Like there were tons of orange trees all over the place. And people were just letting the oranges fall on the ground. So like there are these oranges just like leaves here or acorns or whatever. And I'm like, this is such a waste. I know what to do with these oranges. So I'm squirreling these oranges away in my backpack, right? So, and I'm not sure if you're supposed to take them or not. So I'm a little embarrassed by, like, if someone were to catch me doing it, I'd be embarrassed, right? But I'm sliding them in my backpack and that kind of stuff. So I'm so excited because I've got like all of these oranges in my backpack. So I go to the hotel room and I unzip my backpack. I'll spill all these oranges out, and I'm looking at them and I'm just marveling at these things. Right? Like, wow. And so I take one of the oranges and I start to peel it. Now this orange was really strange because the peel was about an inch thick. And I'm like, what is going on with this thing? So I start peeling this orange, and the actual orange itself was probably the size of a tangerine once you peel back all the, and it was a nice size orange, like a grapefruit size orange. And so I'm thinking this is weird or strange or whatever, but I've not had this experience before. So so I start quartering it, right? And I'm one of those guys, I belabor on making sure that all the veins are off the anybody else like that, right? Because you don't want that stuff, it's just, yeah. So I'm laboring this thing. So then I peel off the quarter. Now I have tons of anticipation because it's been a lot of work just to get to this thing, right? So I peel it, and then I take the quarter and I bite it. It was the most disgusting thing I'd ever tasted. I'm like, yeah, I was trying to spit it out. And I don't know if you do this, but sometimes when stuff is really nasty, you try to wipe your tongue. You know what I'm saying? Try to scrape it off my tongue. And it was disgusting. Why? It was an orange, but it wasn't fruit. Because what can you do with fruit? You can eat it. And if other people can't benefit from your skills, your talents, your tools, then it's not fruit. And so we have to make sure that we're bearing fruit, that we're able to get people to come along with us and do things. Because what we know is if the orange tree produces fruit and we take that fruit and we squeeze all that juice and give it back to the orange tree as its only way of survival, what will happen to that tree? You just take orange juice and you feed it right back to the tree. Just keep doing that. What happens to the tree? It'll die. Why? Because the juice was never meant for the fruit, for the tree. Your talents, your gifts, your abilities, your so-called privileges are not just for you, but they're to be shared with other folks. Opening doors for other folks, making ways for other folks. And many of you do this every day in your life when you work with these young people whose parents have fallen on hard times, or who were replicating systems of dysfunction and abuse that they experience, right? And so we have to recognize that we all have privileges, but it's not the privilege that's the problem. It's what we do with it, or what we don't do with our privileges. All right? Cool. It didn't mean to start out on such a somber note. Hopefully we can pick this up a little bit. So at your table, you should have a handout that starts out looking like this. And if you can do what they talk about in my daughter's school, folded hamburger, hot dog, right? So if you can fold it in half, long ways half, and then halfway with a quarter, you should have a booklet that looks like this. It should look like this by the time you're done. Very good. So we're going to spend some time talking about this idea of implicit bias and cognitive control. And I will let you know that my father is a pastor, and so if I get to preaching, it's not my fault. All right? And oftentimes his messages were eternal, so I will try not to do that as well. So I'll stay within my time. So the first thing I'd like for you to do is open up your handout, and you'll see that it is numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. And at number 3, what I'd like for you to do is to also recognize that there are 5 circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I want you to do is to put one thing that you value or that is important to you in each one of those circles. So write down one thing that is of value to you or important to you in each one of those circles. All right? One thing that is of value or important to you in each one of those circles. It could be a person, like a significant other or a grandchild, a cousin. It could be a concept like justice or freedom. It could be a thing like a motorcycle home or a cabin. It could be a place like Bemidji or Belize. Right? So one thing that you value in each one of those circles, or that is important to you in each one of those circles. Wonderful, wonderful. So from what I can see here, it looks like most people have 4, if not all 5, and if that 5th one's eluding you, that's okay. We'll just move on. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like to play a game. And the game is very simple. What I want you to do is I want you to find a minimum of 2 people to sign on your paper for each one of the things that you wrote down on your paper. A minimum of 2 people. And the criteria for them signing on the circle is that they either have something similar to what you have or they like what you have on your paper. All right? So a minimum of 2 people per circle that either like what you have or have something similar to what you have. You have 90 seconds to do that starting now. You can sign multiple times. $67. I have a whole box in the car. Yeah. You know our challenges over 40, 45 seconds. Laura, I will need you to give me, you can give me 10 minutes before we're done.
Yep.
Because I may lose track.
Just 10?
Just 10.
Four, three, two, one, and game over.
Great, thank you so much for doing that and engaging in that process. As you were going around the room, were there things you saw in other people's papers and you were like, man, why didn't I think of that? I should have wrote that down. What was one of those? Health, sleep, right? Justice, volunteers. Also, when you were also going around the room, were there things that were difficult to find someone to sign on, or you actually didn't find someone to sign on one of your things? What was one of those things? What's that? Mountain Dew? I haven't heard Mountain Dew before. Yeah. So please raise your hand if you value Mountain Dew. All right, we got some dudes in the house. All right, cool, cool, cool. As you look for those commonalities, you look for those differences. What do you think is the moral or the lesson of this particular activity? What's that? Oh, we're able to follow instructions. Okay. Other folks, what do you think was the moral or the lesson? Why would I start with this particular activity? We are, in fact, more alike than we are different. And, yes, everyone's priorities may be different. We have shared values. Yes.
You don't have to share the value to like the value.
You don't have to share the value to like the value. I like that. Well, yes.
There was very little materialism.
There's very little materialism. So we do have commonalities, and we also have differences. So I don't know about you. Please raise your hand if you've been in a diversity training before, or sensitivity training, or cultural competence training. Okay, cool. You are the people I have to fix. Because many of those sessions talk about one of those aspects of us or the other, but never both simultaneously. We have to recognize that we have commonalities and we have differences. And that's okay. Because what is that called? It is called being human. Being human. And that my background, where I came from, the community that I grew up in is important, but that doesn't tell everything about me. What you can see about me, that doesn't give you the full story of who I am, but it is important that you recognize what you see about me. So we have commonalities and differences. And so our task is to recognize those as we try to build relationships. I've done this activity enough. I have some hypotheses that I'd like to test out with you. So as you were writing down the 5 things that are important to you, was there anything there that would specifically talk about your ethnic or racial identity? Was there anything that identified your racial or ethnic identity? Okay, so the majority of people are shaking their head no. As you wrote down things, is there anything that talked specifically about your gender identity or your gender expression, how you fit into a so-called gender role? Was there anything there that identified that specifically? All right, cool. This is my last question, and I'll leave you alone on this, right? Was there anything in there that would talk about your IRS tax bracket? Huh. Why is it when I ask you about your values that things like race and ethnicity, gender and gender expression, or your socioeconomic status didn't come up? Why is that? Okay, so economic stability, is that synonymous with the economic class? No? Okay. For the majority of us, we did not fill those as categories. And you know why? I'll tell you why. I'll let you off the hook. Because you're smart. What did I ask you to do? Write down values that were important to you. Important to you. I was not born black. I'm not suffering a reverse Michael Jackson thing. I'm not, I'm okay. I'm okay, right? In 1970, there were 3 choices that the nurse had for my race: black, white, and other. So she looks at my family, she looks at my parents, she looks at her checklist, she looks at me. She looks at her checklist, she looks at my family, and what decision do you think she makes? Black. But the thing that intrigues me about that whole process is that before she made her distinction, I was here. And what was I? I was born human, but America made me black. If I was born on one side of an island, I'd be Haitian. On the other side, I'd be Dominican. If I was in South Africa, I'd still be colored. Because black is a different designation. Because of the mixed racial heritage that I come from in South Africa, I would be colored. If I lived in France, I'd be French. A Ford F-150, no matter where you place it on the planet, is a Ford F-150. Is anybody familiar with that truck? I want one of those. It's just, everybody that's doing anything seems to have one of those things, right? And one day I'll graduate to the Ford 350. It's like a semi-tank kind of thing, right? I just love it. But anywhere on the planet. But we can't say that about race. We can't say that about ethnicity. It changes based on the context. Now, here, I'll just drop this on you. You look at it for yourself. You do your own investigative abilities, because I'm sure you have some, and you'll do it because Google makes it easy. I just find it interesting that where do you think most of our racial constructs, particularly in the United States, come from? So like, where do those things come? Is it science that we get racial constructs? No, it's not, right? So where do we typically get those things? From where? From politics? Okay. So typically, anybody filled out the census? Yeah, so raise your hand if you've ever filled out the census, or raise your hand if you know what the census is, right? Okay, cool. So the census has all these racial categories, which I think is interesting. I was the affirmative action officer for Anoka County, and I was so good at my job that after I left, they closed the position. They said, nobody can do this better than him, right? We're done, right? They actually just opened it recently, so I'm happy for them. At any rate, so the census and the EEOC, these are the pinnacle places where we get these kind of racial identifications, and they have these words that they use for these racial categories. Now, I find it disturbing, because I would have thought that those departments, the people that run those, would be in different places. But do you know who runs, or what category of the government is responsible for the census? The Department of Commerce. What? If I just looked at that, what would that suggest about these racial categories that they've broken us up into? What is it really about? It's economics. It's economics. Now the 47-year-old of me who's been battered and withered by the world has, I try not to be so, what is it when people aren't positive anymore because they're cynical? I'm trying not to be cynical. But I would almost think that the census could be, the cynicism that I'm trying to stave off, is that it's actually inventory. But I'm trying not to be cynical. Try not to be cynical. So we have to recognize that the places where people are often, it's not because that's where they want to be, but the systems are operated in such a way that they gear us towards certain kinds of things. We're going to talk about that in this next segment. So my daughter's 3 years old, and I love Moana. Has anyone ever seen Moana? Right? I love it. Make way, make way. Right? So I am anti-Disney. I want to put that out on the record. I'm anti-Disney. Beauty and the Beast, I think, is a horrible film. Absolutely horrible. Particularly because it's the system of domestic. The Beast, she says, I can love him into a human. Right? That never works. Never works. Right? He got turned into a beast because he was active. Right? So there's tons of this kind of stuff in Disney films. But this one I like. I really like this. Because here's the premise of the movie. I'm not going to spoil it for you. It is a girl on an adventure. That's it. No love interest. She's not chasing love. She's not running from love. Love has nothing to do with it. This is a little girl who's on an adventure. And as a dad of a 3-year-old girl, I love it. I love it. And so as one of her guides in this whole film is Maui. And so he asks her if she knows how to sail. And she's like, no, I don't. But she's out in the middle of the ocean. So he's like trying to figure this stuff out. Like, how does this work, right? So he starts telling her. And one of the things that he tells her that I thought was so compelling, he said, when you know where you are, you know who you are. When you know where you are, you know who you are. And he does this thing with the hand and with the horizon and trying to use the hand as a sextant, right, to kind of navigate. So my daughter and I, when I go like this, she goes, we know where we are, right? So what I like to submit to you is this kind of elephant that's in our existence, that's in our society. Because if you don't identify it, if we don't talk about it, then we get confused about where we are. Right? So the budget constraints that you're feeling and the way that the state and the national government is reducing its value on what things that we valued in the past, things that we could count on in the past, is a part of something bigger. And if you don't recognize that, then you'll be confused about what's going on. And I don't want you to be confused. I want you to be crystal clear, because then you know what you have to do as a person with clarity. Now, I will tell you that I am not a Democrat or a Republican. I do have political leanings, and it's called the Constitution of the United States. That's what I lean on. And so here are the results of the election. Oh, by the way, anybody have smartphones? All right. So if you have smartphones, keep them on. Keep them on. At the top of the presentation, there's a link. If you go to that link, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to leave it at that thing, and I'll see it right here, and I'll address those that are appropriate as we move forward. All right. But what do you recognize about this map? Not very many Democratic places. What else do you notice? That it's divided. That the most what? The most populous places are Democrat. So this is something that I find pretty problematic, and I don't know if you've had exposure to this, but there are. So I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and we never really had gangs. Like, we didn't have gangs. When I moved to St. Louis, I actually got exposed to like what real gangs were. We had groups when I grew up, we had groups of kids that did stuff, right? And you didn't want to be with that group, or this group was trying to get you with them, but it really wasn't quite a gang. And we would call them gangs, but they really weren't gangs, right? Well, I actually experienced real gangs, with people with real affiliation and real stuff. And I found it interesting that they had broken themselves into two categories. It is the blue group and the red group. And that even when you got out of the gang, officially, you submitted, you turned in your card, you would never be red, or you would never be the opposite, or what the kids call ops, right? So when the media starts this kind of stuff, I get a knee-jerk reaction, because this seems to be acceptable, but when it was on the streets, it wasn't acceptable. It was villainized, it was demonized. When it was crack cocaine, lock them up, and now that it's opioids, let's find treatment. So I think that's interesting. So if you know where you are, then you know who you are. So up in the far corner is that there's a map, and it's mostly red, and that was the 1980 election of President Ronald Reagan. And mostly red. Except for where? Minnesota and Georgia and West Virginia. Why Minnesota and Georgia? Why were they blue? Carter and Mondale. At least they pulled their own states. I was proud for them. Proud for them. Right? What I would tell you is that there's a gambit being run on us. There's a certain kind of way they want us to think about the world, and it is not the world that actually exists. This election was not about Republican or Democrat, and that's why people got it wrong, because they judged it. I don't know if anybody else heard the thing, but some people were just sitting there like, why should I vote? Because we already know who won, right? Because all those political people who do the commentating and all that was going to be before they actually knew the results. But they were wrong. Why? Because this wasn't a Democratic or Republican election. This was an election of ideologies. Ideologies. So many of the people in the red, and what we also recognize is that what that populace also provides for us, and we'll even look at the state of Minnesota. Let's look at the state of Minnesota. No questions yet. So we'll look at the state of Minnesota. We see a very similar thing as what we saw nationally, right? So centers where there are either universities, lots of populations. We see red versus blue, which is red typically is not. And so what does this say to us? It does not say that this is Republican or Democrat. What this says is there's an ideology that in these red areas, they're saying that change is moving too fast. They are conservative. I'm not talking about a political party. I'm talking about a mindset that says it's too much, too fast. And so they voted for a candidate that said, I will either stop change or I will slow it down. As a matter of fact, I will change time and reverse change. Now, in our logic, we know that that's not possible, but when people feel uncomfortable, they go for that stuff. So this is how we get people to vote against their own best interests. I will tell you, coal must die for solar to live. Coal must die. So driving down here, I drove down 694, and there's a company, and I think every 5 years it changes, it either changes names or it's a different company. And it's, first it was TDK Systems, and they did tapes, cassette tapes, right? They did memory cassette tapes. Then it went to the floppy disk, and it was called Imagine something else. It went from TDK to Imagine something. And I just drove by on my way down here, and it's changed again because they deal with memory. I remember just 5 years ago, I bought the top of technology, a 512 jump drive. 512. At the store just the other day, I bought a 4 terabyte jump drive. 4 terabytes. I don't even know how many. I can't count terabytes, right? Change is happening. And so what has happened is we have this ideology that says we're conservative. We want to save stuff. We want to preserve what we have in the face of change happening anyway. Change happening anyway. Change is going to happen. And either we will help direct it or we will read it in history. If you understand that this was an election of ideology, then when you see certain behaviors, you can understand those behaviors. Sorry. You can understand those behaviors. So if we know who we are, we know where we are. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and we would take a yearly family photo. Anybody ever do that right around Thanksgiving, Christmas, family photos, getting ready for stuff? And we went to a place called Olin Mills. I don't know if anybody had Olin Mills, right? And so early in the 70s, they just had like this oatmeal kind of background and the thing kind of grayish oatmeal-y. And so all the pictures looked the same no matter what it was. And but then towards the end, in the 80s, they started getting fancy. And they would do like a double exposure. Shop, so I'm not exactly sure how they did it, but they thought that was cool. But now it looks really creepy, right? So you get the front view of the family, and then you get them looking off into space, kind of thing. Which is really kind of creepy now, but that was the thing. And so I imagine that that the United States is like that, right? Like we take these family photos, and be it the census or the elections, whatever, we take these family photos. And when you took your family photos, when you got the photo back, who was the first person you looked for? You look for yourself. You look for yourself. Right? And over a period of years, you can kind of look at your fashions and ask yourself, what was I thinking? Like when I had my hair up like this, like a big fan, what was that, right? Or I had that big bump, like what were those kids from from New Jersey, right? And the girl had the big, you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah, whatever. So looking like a Klingon. You look like a big old Klingon. So you look for yourself. Now, what would happen if you continue to get photos of your family and your face is blurred out? So the first time you look at the photo, you go, oh, my face is blurred out. What's your first question? Why? Who do you blame? You blame the photographer, you blame someone else, you say, you know what, it was something wrong with the system. But after about 4 or 5 years of this happening, then what do you start asking? What's wrong with me? Why am I not? Everybody else is in the picture, why am I not in the picture? When we talk about this idea of social justice, that's exactly what we're proposing. So in your handout, at number 1, we, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, those who come behind us. We do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Woo! I love that picture. It's a great American picture. Those are great, powerful words. And what? There's a lot of people not in that picture, huh? Not everybody was in the picture. And so when we talk about the social justice stuff, people say, well, we just want to we just want to talk about diversity and skin thing to make somebody else feel guilty. No, I don't want to make you feel guilty. I want to be in the picture. If you said I'm supposed to be in the picture, I want to be in the picture. Because if I'm not supposed to be in the picture, give me my 40 acres and a mule and I'm out. Which would equate to about $1.5 million a piece. No, people are trying to be in the picture. So let's look at some ways in which folks have been kept out of the picture and how we've tried to bring them into the picture. So 1830, Indian Removal Act by President Andrew Jackson. And what was that Indian Removal Act supposed to do? Open up land for white people. Push the Indians west with the ultimate goal of what? Having them fall into the ocean. I'm so glad that the Creator didn't let that happen. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation does what for whom? It frees humans out of the worst human trafficking in the history of the world. And I'd say more specifically, not to be so dramatic, in the history of this country. Now, this is what I want to say, and I want you to hear me very clearly, because people will say, well, why do people keep bringing up slavery, and you're always bringing it up, and we need to just get over it and stop talking about slavery. This I want to tell you just right now, slavery wasn't personal. It wasn't personal. It was what? It was economic. So when I try to talk about an economic system, and I want to change how we talk about that economic system, or why it was important for it to change, again, my cynicism creeps up. I'm glad that President Lincoln does it, but there's questionable if he did it out of benevolence or out of necessity. The Industrial Revolution was happening. Machines were happening. We were starting to move some stuff. So the shift of power from the north to the south, and the South had been holding the U.S. Accountable for a very long time. And I think the North got tired of doing that. What I will also say is that the South didn't sell all of their goods to themselves. So as much as the North wants to say we weren't a part of that, blood is on their hands too. So we know 1863 freed people, human beings, out of that economic system of slavery. But did it? The answer to that is in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. I'll leave you to explore that yourself. 1887, the Dawes Act started telling Native Americans, you can be an American citizen if you sell your land to us. If you sell your land, which was actually quite a false deal, because in many cases, treaties weren't being honored anyway. So they took it anyway, right? But there are some reprieves. So in 1920, the 19th Amendment is signed doing what for whom? Giving women the right to board. Hear them roar. Right? Although that was the beginning of women's suffrage, we know to this day, women are still fighting to get rights. Me too! Me too! I don't know if anybody's familiar with that campaign, that hashtag, right? 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act is signed saying that American Indians can be U.S. citizens without anything. They can just be citizens. Wasn't that kind of the United States? 1964 Civil Rights Act does what? It defines discrimination. It becomes a legal tool that we can use, discrimination, and outlaws segregation. I find it interesting that in 2050, the people who have been fighting against this will be needing this. It's interesting. Outlaw segregation. Define discrimination. Created the on-ramp for people who haven't been able to participate in our government, in policies, in employment, particularly for the federal government. 1978, the Native American Freedom of Religion Act is signed, saying that Native Americans can worship however, wherever, whenever they want. So kind. And then 1990, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. Who was the ADA built for? Who is it made for? Veterans coming home? Who's it made for? What's that? For the disabled? Okay, great, great, great. Please raise your hand if you plan on getting old. I'm raising both of my hands. ADA is for you. It's for you. Right? So, no. Who's in the picture? Why aren't people in the picture? What does it mean when that picture is Koen? So let's talk a little bit about this idea of implicit bias. So right at number 3, you see a larger circle. Does everyone see that larger circle? And if you don't have a handout, you can just draw a circle on a piece of paper. You can follow right along. We'll come back. Yeah. So let's call this the circle of all human knowledge. Okay, it's a little melodramatic, right? So let's say this is the pie of human knowledge. What I want you to do is to cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is to know. All right? So cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is to know. And you do know something, right? You know something. All right, now I want you to cut a second piece of pie, and the second piece of pie is the size of what you know you do not know. You are aware of that you don't know. So, for example, I know that I don't know Mandarin Chinese. I know that I don't know how to fly an airplane, and I now know that I should not be doing lobotomies. I learned that the hard way. Right? So the things you know, you don't know. That's your second piece. And I know some people say, well, isn't it the rest of the circle? I challenge you because there is a third piece that we'll talk about. All right? So what are some things that you know you don't know? There's 3. Astrophysics. Please raise your hand if you know you don't know astrophysics. Cool. A second one. What's that? String theory. If you know you don't know string theory, please raise your hand. If you don't even know what she's talking about, right? No, just right? Yes, and then lastly, what's the third one? What everyone else feels. If you know you don't know that, please raise your hand. Right? So there are things that we know, there are things that we know we don't know, and what do you think is that last piece of that pie, that third piece? What you don't know, you don't know. And you can also write in that area blind spot. So right in that third area, blind spot. It was so funny, I was at a conference and somebody yelled, "You got that from Donald Rumsfeld." And I said, you can use it for evil or for good, you decide, right? So there's what we know, there's what we know we don't know, and there's the blind spot. And if we took all 3 of those pieces and we put them together, I want you to write a word next to that circle called paradigm. P-A-R-A-D-I-G-M, paradigm. I used to say paradigm. I was hooked on phonics. It worked for me. Okay, some of you get the joke. Good. Paradigm. And what is a paradigm? It's what? It's canon. Okay? So it's a solid way of seeing something. And what I would tell my middle schools is that it's simply the way you see the world. And the way you see the world is extremely important because it allows you to see things, right? It defines things for you. So who was responsible for providing you with your first set of paradigms? Your parents, your guardians, the people who were responsible for your upbringing. And where did those individuals get their paradigm? From their parents, their guardians, those people that were responsible for caring and raising them. And where did they get theirs? Also from their parents. So it is a gift that keeps on giving. What's the biggest problem with a paradigm? The majority of it is what? A blind spot. So I keep passing on these blind spots. Anyone ever received a copy of 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 a copy? By the time that thing has been copied that many times and you get it, does it look exactly like the original? I would suggest no. And why has it changed? Because things have been added to it. Things are faded away. Things are changing. And we haven't necessarily recognized what those changes are. And so paradigm is extremely important. So when we talk about this, and we talk about blind spots, we talk about being nurtured and raised. And so I cannot give my kids what I don't have. The most brilliant thing my parents did was put me in the hands of people who had stuff they didn't. They sent me to summer camp whenever they could. I was a part of clubs. I was part of social outings, things that my parents were not. I remember in 6th grade, they had you fill out those forms. Where do you want to be in, 40 years, like 30 years or whatever? And I was like, I want to be a professor. Now, here's the strange thing. I didn't know any professors growing up. There was nobody around us who was a professor. My parents went to college and university, and maybe I sat in classes with them. I don't remember, and they haven't talked about that. But I didn't know their professors. But guess what my parents did? They put me in places where professors were, so I could figure that out. So here's some truths about human beings. We know that human beings can learn, change, and grow. That's why we're in this business, right? We're trying to help young people live, change, and grow to a changing context. But this process happens even when we don't see results. As a high school teacher, I would get frustrated because I would pour into my kids' skills. I want them to get these things, and I was looking for the results. When I was black, I wanted to paint the White House black. When I was younger, I wanted to throw the table of everything and just start over, blah, 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 blah. But that's not how stuff works. That's not how stuff works. Because I wanted to be the center of that change as opposed to recognizing that change as a process is going to happen. And that my job is not to turn over the tables or paint the White House black, but my job is to run my leg of the race and not miss the handoff. And whenever run track or seen people run track, the most important part is that the person coming up knows their pace and that they hit that thing at the right time so the next person can run their leg of the race without any hindrances. And so that's our job. Our job is to take care of these young people and give them the handoff so that they can take and move forward. We know that people do what they think works even when what? It doesn't work. I love it when con men get caught. Love it. Have no mercy on them. And what catches a con person? Arrogance. Yeah, I've done this con a million times. I'm going to do it one more time. And guess what happens? Somebody either got hip to the con, something changed about the con, and it doesn't work. All human behavior is goal-directed. We'll talk about what those goals are in just a second. And then an attitude is a reaction to a goal. Anyone encounter an attitude? So tell me if you've seen this scenario play out. A young person comes up to an adult and says, "Adult, I just got a text. Marsha's got a party. Starts in 5 minutes. Can you drop me off?" What's the parent say or the adult say? "No, you can't go to that party. You should give me any time to prepare. You got stuff to do. Your room, and you got to see all the stuff you've been saving, right? And in the back of your mind now, just unleash, right? You got to see on your report card last semester. No, you can't go to this party." And what happens to the kid? Transformers. I hate you. And then they go to their room like they own the joint and close the door. But then the adult is like, you know what, let me think about this. You know what, I unload on the kid, it's not fair, it's not good. Goes to the kid's room, knocks on the door, and the kid says, "What do you want?" And the adult says, "You know what, you can go to Marsha's party. I know you're supporting Marsha. She's got acne really bad, and you've been a really good friend to her. She needs your support. So get your coat, let's go." What happens to the kid's attitude? It changes. Why? They got what they wanted. Sometimes when we see attitudes, we mistake the emotional display that we're seeing as if that is the thing, when that is a sign of something greater that we should be understanding. So when young people, when even coworkers, family members, when they act out in that way, showing these bad behaviors, they're telling you about their goals. And when I'm not able to reach my goal, I have a bad attitude. But when I'm able to reach my goal, I have a good attitude. So an attitude is a side effect of recognizing goal accomplishment. Goal accomplishment. So our identity is important. And what is it that human goals are all driven towards? They're driven towards seeking safety, significance, and belonging. Significance simply says that I'm a person born with purpose and power. I can do something. And our job is to make sure that the young people that we have charge over recognize or find their purpose. Either God can open up that purpose to them, or they get to decide what their purpose is, but they have a purpose. They have a purpose. And I would submit to you, I bet your friends understand the people you surround yourself with, understand your purpose oftentimes more so or better than your own family does. Purpose. Significance. Belonging says that we long for relationships with other human beings that recognize our significance. I want to be connected with people who understand my significance, who understand what I can do, who understand my purpose, my power. I want to be connected to those things. And then lastly, I want to be physically, emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually safe to be in relationships with people who understand my significance. Kids join gangs. One of those three things, or a combination of those three things. Why do we choose to be guardians? Because we're trying to give or make sure that those things are available to young people. Okay? As a parent, my foremost responsibility is making sure that my daughter has as many of those things as I can possibly give her. And I'm smart enough to know that if I don't have it, I can send it to somebody who does. How is it that rich people have become rich? How is it that rich people have become rich? Luck? Work? Thievery? Let me ask a better question. Who taught rich people how to become rich? Other rich people. Who's taught poor people how to be poor? Other poor people. What I suggest is that the state of being that we're in, we are human beings. We adapt to the environments that we're in. And if we can help teach people how to operate in different environments, we actually will get different results. We actually will get different results. Because we're all yearning for the same thing. Now, this is something I'm going to say this is somewhat controversial, but it goes to this next point. I told my class, so I teach at Bethel University, I teach a class called Educational Equity, and it's really about how to close this so-called achievement gap or this opportunity gap. And I said this to my students, and they don't write a lot of notes down, but this particular day they wrote a lot of notes down. It was just really interesting when they started writing down, because I told them, I said, I understand the alt-right. I understand the alt-right. I told them, I understand the neo-Nazis. I understand the neo-Nazis. And those white supremacists, I get them. I get them. What are they after? The same things I'm after. Safety, significance, and belonging. But what issue might I have with those groups? their methods. Their methods. So if we can talk about, yes, I understand that's what you want. Can we negotiate your methods? Because I want the same thing for them that they want for them. I want the same things for me that I think we have commonalities. But where we have differences is in those methods, how those things get worked out. And that's the kind of stuff we can negotiate. Talk with me and we can work that kind of stuff out. Why? Because we're all human. We're all human. What is the most valuable, non-renewable resource on the planet outside of teeth? The human soul. The human soul. Fortunately, in my case, there will only be one of me. Right? I don't think the world could take more than one of me. Right? There will only be one Andre. There will only be one you. And what I would suggest is that the children that we're responsible for is that we're not actually just working for their physical body, but we're actually working for their soul. For their soul. And the soul is made up of two parts. It's the body and it's the spirit. And where those things go or where they come from, I don't have answers for, but this is what I recognize, right? So when my grandmother died, a hall and people would come up and talk to her and give her notes, and you have a creepy family member that tries to touch her, right? And I'd stand there, you can't touch grandma. She didn't want you touching her alive. You're not going to touch her while she's dead, right? And as my grandmother's laying there, how does she respond? She doesn't. Why? Because she's a thing. I know that's crass. I love my grandmother. One of my favorite people on the planet. But that wasn't my grandmother in that casket. That was her body. And then later we would go to her house for spaghetti dinner and stuff. And those same people were trying to touch my grandmother, now trying to steal her ashtrays. And my grandmother didn't smoke for 20 years, but she still had ashtrays. And you're not taking her ashtrays without her permission, right? And it felt like my grandmother was there as we look at pictures and we reminisce and we talk, but she can't animate anything. And so when the body is without the spirit, the body becomes a thing. And the spirit becomes powerless without the body. And so we're trying to capture and hold tight and help these young folks contain their spirit in their body. One of the biggest tricks that happened during the transatlantic slave trade in the United States was that the biggest problem was that this economic system was trying to turn human beings into cogs, trying to turn them into pieces of machinery. I don't know if many folks remember or saw this as a kid. I did a mini-series called Roots, right, by Alex Haley. The opening scenes, they have this young man that they've captured from West Africa, and they strap him up in the thing, and they're going to condition him for this economic system called slavery. And so they hit him, and he screeches, ah! And the man says, "What is your name?" And he says, "My name is Kunta Kinte." And the man says, "No, your name is Toby." And they, and this continues and continues and continues until they're both worn out. And the man has one last slash. And he says, "What is your name?" And the young man's reply is, "My name is Toby." What happened? Tried to turn him into a thing. The thing about sex trafficking is it's not just the act, because people can do whatever they want behind closed doors, but it's actually about trying to turn human beings into cogs, into things. And we have to resist that. We have to resist that, because human beings are not things. We have significance. We have belonging, and we should be provided safety. And so what we know is that oftentimes our implicit bias, those blind spots that we're not paying attention to, those things that we can easily ignore. I have a friend, and I'm working with him. He says, "Andre, I'm tired of talking about racism." I said, "I am too." The difference between us is he can actually stop. I can't. I was in St. Francis, and I was running a group out there, and I stopped at the McDonald's in St. Francis. I don't know if anybody's been up that way or not, but it's just a little store, and there's a McDonald's there. So I'm sitting at the McDonald's, and a kid comes up. He comes from behind the counter, and I guess he's off, taking a break, or he's off, and he has his McDonald's hat, and then he turns it to the side as he comes from around the corner, and he has McDonald's uniform pants, and he pulls them down to sag. Right? So McDonald's uniform pants are pretty straight, right? So he's got this straight thing, but he's pulling them down and sag. And he comes around the corner, and I happen to be the only African-American there, and he happens not to be African-American. And he comes up to me and he says, yo, what's up? I dress like this like every day of when I go fishing, I dress just like this. This is how, I don't know if this looks like a yo, what's up or not, right? And I said, how are you? I said, how are you? He said, I'm good, man. He said, hey, you ever check out that Tech 9? Now, I know that a Tech 9 is a weapon, but I'm figuring that he's not talking about a weapon at this point, that he's probably talking about a musical artist or something like that. And I'm looking at him, and now I'm offended. I'm offended. Because here's this white boy trying to act black to a black person who doesn't act black. I had a blind spot. I had to pierce my blind spot. What was the young man trying to do? He was trying to build a bridge. And at that moment, I could either help him build that bridge or I could smash his bridge. And I said, and that's when I got into the father mode. Right? So I said, no, young man, I don't. I had to throw that in there, right? So he knows I'm an older cat, right? So I was like, no. I was like, no, I don't listen to that stuff. But I was like, but is it good music? And he says, oh yeah, man, it's dope. I said, so what's good about it? And they no. And so we actually got to talking, and I posed some questions to him to help him think about the music that he's listening to. Even though he came to me sideways, he didn't come correct. But I had a responsibility because he was not a white boy. He was my boy. He was my son. He was mine. I don't know him. I don't have any responsibility to him. He's a human being, just like I am. And if I don't treat him as such, he'll never know what it's like to be treated like a human being from a human being. And so when we talk about this, these things are important. We have to recognize that we have implicit bias. We have blind spots that we operate with all the time. And what is the problem with the blind spot? Anyone drive a car? Does your car have blind spots? I would submit that it does. Is that your fault? I would suggest that it's probably not your fault, but it is your responsibility. It is your responsibility. Just want to flip through a couple of things throughout the handout. One of the ways in which our blind spots enact itself is through this idea of the illusion of knowledge. What I want you to do just really quickly, just take 2 minutes to do this. I want you to draw a bicycle. So draw a bicycle. You've either seen a bicycle, ridden on a bicycle, you know what a bicycle looks like. So just draw a bicycle. All right, now share your bicycle with your neighbor. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. As you were looking at your bicycle compared to other people's bicycles, were there things, no, let me put it this way. If I took the drawing of your bicycle and sent it to a manufacturer, would we? Oh, okay, cool. So we have the illusion of knowledge. We think we know how things work when sometimes we may not necessarily do that. And so that is a part of our implicit bias. We operate as if we know when in fact we don't. It is important to realize that we do have some universal things about us being human, but there are some nuances that may have not shown up in your bicycle that actually make us work. Right? And so how do I find out about those blind spots? I have to ask questions, I have to seek things, I have to build relationships. We know that diversity, if you look at letter D, diversity really is about our commonalities and our differences simultaneously. Those shapes are very similar and they're very different at the same time. And so those things aren't mutually exclusive. So when working with families, I would suggest that it's better to build on commonalities than it is to operate off of differences. So as you're working with families, working with young people, helping them to build self-esteem, be advocates for themselves, building those commonalities. At letter C is a self-assessment that I want you to take at your own convenience. And that's really helping you to look at your blind spots. So places where the people on the left, be it the parents, family, media, school, workplace, where they gave you positive information about the groups across the top, you put a plus. Where they gave you negative information, you put a minus. And where there was never a discussion, you put a 0. Right at letter C. And you can have pluses and minuses in both of those. But that really will help you look at places where you may have blind spots. We know that equity is making sure that equality is giving everyone the same thing, but equity is giving people what they need. And I would suggest that if we went a step further, that inclusion is really about limiting barriers that are unnecessary, right? So diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that at letter F, when we look at this idea of culture, that culture is a physical manifestation of values. It is the adaptation to the context, and that artifacts are the physical manifestations of values. So when I see a kid sagging his pants, why is the kid sagging his pants? What is he trying to get? Safety, significance, and belonging. So I have to honor that. I also have to teach the child that that is a contextual way of being, that in a particular context that will work for you. But when you go to a job, to get a job, the context is different, which means you have to what? Act different in that context, right? So what if I told you that one of your values that you wrote on your on those circles was wrong or bad? How would you respond to me? Probably pretty negatively, right? And so our job is to not teach people what's good and bad, but give them the context by which they can operate, help them understand the context. We know that bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination are related to people's behaviors. We know that discrimination is a behavior. We know that prejudice is a thought process, and that bigotry is an emotion. Oftentimes, we have misdiagnosed bigots. Bigots are not ignorant. I used to say that. I used to say bigots. Archie Bunker, as an example. Many of you are old enough to remember that show, right? Archie Bunker. And oftentimes, he would have someone who would give him information. And Archie would have information. It might oftentimes be the wrong information, but he had information. And when I've encountered bigots, they've told me what their problem was. Because I give them information to the point that they would get to the root. And they would say, Andre, I don't care what you say. This is how I feel. Bigotry is an emotional state. And I would suggest to you that how we adjust emotional states or change emotional states is by allophilia. A fancy word for love. We have to love those who are different from us, even when they haven't so-called earned it. We have to give compassion. And people say, well, you don't be walked over. You can't. I don't want anybody walking over me. Okay, that's cool. You can be a doormat then. How many people have a doormat at your house? Does that doormat serve a purpose? What is the purpose? So that as you enter into a new place, the old dirt is left behind. So some of us are called to be doormats. You can walk on me, I'm cool. Because I just shake off. And I'm ready for the next person. But others of us can be bridges. But we can't let our blind spots limit us. Last story I'll share. I think they have like 3 minutes. So last story. So I live in Mounds View, which is the one of the most northern counties in Ramsey County. As a matter of fact, I thought it was Anoka because right across the street is Spring Lake Park, which is in Anoka. Right? So I'm up there, and I go to a bar restaurant, and it's about 10 o'clock on a Saturday, and I walk in and I recognize that there's a guy at the end of the bar who's red-faced and drunk. Who's red-faced. And, so I'm mapping out my surroundings. I see where I am, I know who I have to be in the spaces that I'm in, right? So I fold I fold my menu, I hand it back to the staff, and the dude moves from the end of the seat next to me. And I'm like, really? So I don't know about you, but I'm not afraid of too many people, right? Because I can fight. And if you fight like that, they won't hit you. I noticed it. You won't get punched. So I'm in this restaurant, and the guy sits down next to me, and we start doing small talk, and I'm talking about weather and all sorts of stuff. And he leans over to me, and he says, "You know what? I don't like niggers." Yeah, I did the same thing. I was taken back. And so my initial response to that was to change the subject. But the voice in my head that sometimes encourages me to do things that I'm not smart enough or skilled enough to do said, no, don't back away from that, address that. So I addressed it. I said, sir, when you use that word, what are you talking about? And he said, I mean people who are ignorant, living off the system, won't work, blah, 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 blah. I said, oh, cool. I said, do you know any white people who fit that description? And he looks at me and he says, yeah. I said, how about those twins, right? So we start talking about twins and that kind of stuff. We're talking about stuff. And then he leans over a little while later and he says, you know what? I don't like niggers, but I like you. Now, I'm a little bit confused, right? And so I asked him, I said, sir, what is it about me that you like? He said, you're intelligent. You have a good head on your shoulders. You've got goals. And I said, great. I said, what if all the people that you've met that you think look like me, all the ones that you've met that you think look like me, are idiots. And all the rest of us that you haven't met are just like me. And he looks at me and he says, I gotta pee. So he gets up and he goes to the bathroom. I get my stuff, I'm headed out, I'm done. I'm feeling pretty good about the resolution. We hadn't had to have any altercation, right? So I get my stuff, I'm headed out the door, and guess who meets me at the door? It's this guy. And he has a damp napkin in his hand. His hair's combed over to the side, he's got water driplets, and he says, I raise chickens, fresh eggs, give me a call. So I take the napkin, I go my way, he goes his way. I never called him. What happened for him? He felt guilty? Did I have every right to give him a piece of my mind? Did I have every right to tell him off? Yeah, I did. Done for him. Probably proved everything that he thought about people who he thought looked like me. You to take disrespect or to give disrespect or be disrespectful, but I'm going to tell you what my grandfather told me. My grandfather was the kind of guy that would sweep the alley. And one day I said, Grandma, why are we sweeping the alley? He said, because it's ours. The alley belongs to us. And one day I got a little uppity because I was tired of sweeping the alley and picking up other people's trash. And I said, Granddad, why are we the ones that have to pick up other people's trash? He said, son, you have to pick up that trash because you saw it. Yeah. You are guardians because you see the need. And there are other people who might not see the need. You work with the disadvantaged folks because you see the need. You are compelled to, but by the fact that you have sight beyond sight. You can see what's there, but you also can see what the future is. I love the life that I've led because I love the seeds that I've planted. I got an email just the other day from one of my middle schoolers who is now a teacher. And her kids are now experiencing an educational system that I helped to influence as well. If we can get ourselves out of the way, we can actually get to doing some work. On the last part of your handout is something that I want you to remember. Not only are people looking for safety, significance, and belonging, not only are we capturing human souls, but our job is to give the dignity and honor in being human. Please raise your hand if you've done anything to get yourself to be on this planet. None of us have done anything to bring ourselves here, and we're just trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure out what it means to be human. And what I'll offer you is that human is a relational act. And that to be human means to be in service of humans and have those humans be in service of us. I want to thank you for allowing me to be in the service of you on this morning. My name is Andre Koen. Have a great day. Thank you.